Did you see my email just a couple minutes ago?
Good evening or afternoon, and welcome to the Council Finance Committee of Thursday, March 21st, 2024. Sorry, I've just been doing too many things today. Three items on the agenda. The first of these is discussion regarding the FYE 24-25 City of Norman budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are a few items in your packet related to the next year's budget that were kind of carryover from last month's meeting. The first one relates to the outside agencies. We had some direction, but there were some that we kind of were still unclear on the direction of the committee on. The first one of those relates to the Norman Music Festival and the Norman Arts Alliance. As you'll recall, they had requested an increase from $10,000 in this fiscal year to $50,000 in the coming fiscal year. Councilmember Montoya had asked for some additional financial statements from them, which I believe that was received. Tell me if not. But then just kind of wanted your direction on those.
Councilmember Montoya.
Well, I was hoping that maybe one of them would be here because I had heard through that the Oklahoma Arts Council has awarded lots of nonprofit arts organizations grants. So I was wondering, what if they knew what they were awarded. But so after getting an understanding behind how the outside agencies came to be, so they were prior city departments, city employees. Then sometime early 2000s, the city decided, hey, we're going to
Didn't want to give them benefits.
not really kick
so-
you out, but you could stay in our buildings, but you're on your own for your operational expenses. So given that, I am not willing to set a precedent to start adding to this list. So I know that I know the city supports them through the hotel motel funds, and I think for FY25, they're getting a $37,000 grant. And then I learned that the city, through public safety measures, the police department has increased their public safety, so we pay approximately $25,000 in salaries for overtime, and I don't believe that included payroll tax. So just those two things alone, the city supports the festival by $62,000, and I just can't be behind supporting it with general fund dollars. And I understand expenses go up, but I would hope that they will scrutinize and really review their expenses and maybe take advantage of their 501c3 status. So sometimes business owners will work with nonprofits and will, cut them a deal on whatever. But so that's where I'm at, is I am not willing to set a precedent to start adding to this list, given its history.
I agree with that, in that it's nice to throw a party. It's hard to throw a party for all of Oklahoma on our dime. If there's another way the music festival can earn money, I don't know if that would be a wristband ticket kind of a thing and a special pass for 3 days.
They've always prided themselves on it being free.
Yeah.
But most of their money comes from booth rentals for, vendors and beer distributors and that sort of thing.
However they want to do it, but I agree with Councilmember Montoya that it's hard to support that. Thoughts?
For me, I think it's just proven to be such a benefit to the city that I would support funding some, and I'd be willing to negotiate on whether it's $50,000 or not. But I'd like to contribute some, in my opinion. So
Some more than the 10,000?
more than the 10,000.
Okay.
But maybe not the full 50 that they're asking for. But I just feel like these are important programs in the city of Norman that bring a lot of attention to us, and they help support a lot of small businesses, and so I'm okay with us using funding to contribute towards them. So, but I do understand where Councilor Montoya and you are both coming from about it as well. We don't, everybody can ask. That's why I tell people, you can ask, you might not get it, and you can't rely on getting it every year either, if you're asking the city for it. So times are okay right now, we can afford to perhaps, but next year we might not be able to. And so if we gave you $50,000 this year, would you be setting yourself up for a real bad situation if the city council next year said, no, we can't, or we don't want to? So I'm okay with giving them some, but I would want to, negotiate what that number would be,
Okay.
for sure. I'd be okay with the full amount, but, I'm not stuck on that.
I'll get you in a second. If we're saying some over the 10,000, what are you thinking? 20,000 or?
If we could increase it, I don't know for sure, but they had 10, they're asking for a 40,000 increase. I don't know, what if we gave them a 20,000 for a total of 30?
Okay, that's a point of discussion.
Somewhere to start.
Councilmember Grant?
We still have time to bring them in and talk to them and see if they got any additional funding and ask these questions that Councilmember Holman brought up, because I would like to hear what their plans are for the future. And also, I believe I didn't see it in our agenda, and it might have been in last month's, but I would like to know what the economic impact dollar, like, we spend $1, we bring back 7, like, what's the number there? And that might have been in the last packet, but good to bring into the discussion if we're talking about, like, what we're investing and what we're getting back for it.
You want to put this on the table till next month? Or,
We can table it
We
till
would
next
really
month.
need direction of, if it's going to get into the city manager's proposed budget, we need direction at this meeting.
At this
Now, you could do it as an amendment later on, but as far as the city manager's budget, we need direction. at this
Printing
meeting.
shortly.
I guess I could get behind the total of 30 that we just discussed, with the knowledge that that could actually fluctuate and be less or more. I don't know.
I wouldn't be opposed to it being an amendment too, if that's what we have to do.
I missed you, I'm
I
sorry.
wouldn't be opposed to it being an amendment to the budget, if that's what is decided later
That's
on, if
what
that's
I
it
would
is.
prefer. I'd prefer to stick where we are and then go to an amended afterwards, if that's, does that work for everybody? Well, let's stick with the 10,000 and then ask them to come in. You want to do it in the middle between finance meetings, and just get it as quickly as we can? A
Yeah, I would
meeting,
say whenever they can.
whenever we can get something going. Yes, sir.
The, not related to Norm Music Festival, but another festival asked me about getting on this list. And I said, well, anybody can apply, the Medieval Fair. But the director had an interesting question about whether they even could, because of their affiliation with the university, if they could apply for this type of city funding or not, because of all the, I guess, red tape that may exist on that side of things. So I just told them I would ask about that question, and maybe we could answer it at a different meeting, but
There wouldn't be any legal reason not to. I mean,
on our end.
right.
Okay. They've just had the same thing. I think they mentioned that we charge $10 per booth, and they have 256 booths, so we're charging them $2,600 a year just for permits. And I guess they're being charged now for parking, not by us, but maybe by OU, and they weren't before. So everybody's got costs going up, but they have some costs that didn't exist before. And not that the permit one is, but the parking one is. So it came up in conversation, so I said, well, we can ask about it. And so they didn't know that they would be making a request this year, but I just told them that they could, any organization could make a request and then see.
It'd be a next year thing, I think would be the answer.
Again, that's, you could do it as an amendment, you could direct us at this meeting that you wanted added to the city manager's budget. It's totally up to you.
But a OU affiliated organization could ask for,
Yes.
okay.
I didn't know that. Yes, ma'am, you were.
Oh, yeah,
You're done.
disregard.
So the thought of what booth rental space is worth, it never dawned on me to think, what is usual and customary for an event like that, for a vendor to anticipate paying for a space from which to sell
Yeah.
their wares?
Maybe
$10 sounds like a bargain.
Yeah, at County Fair, I think we pay 50 and 85, depending on how many numbers. They used to have those numbers up there you go to.
Just for clarification, that's what we charge the fair. What the fair charges their vendors might be something else. Because I'm
Yeah.
thinking that is not covering, I mean, that they want to cover more than their permit.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, and I would point out, as Councilman Montoya did, that I'm sure that the police department pays overtime for officers to be at the medieval fair, and I know that sanitation and park maintenance provides them services.
And- Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, is there a way to factor that into these requests when they come forward? It's like ways we're already supporting it with overtime, sanitation, all that.
Difficult to quantify, you know.
But in-kind services.
But in-kind
Yeah.
services.
And then thinking about the cell data that we get that lets us know how many people actually went, and then we kind of have an idea of how much tax or sales tax was generated from that event.
That's sales tax. That's, you know, when they calculate how many people came, yes, there are those multiplier effects that the Convention and Tourism Bureau does, but that's not sales tax. You know.
And I obtained, data from the Oklahoma Tax Commission to try and find a trend, but I really couldn't find any kind of trend.
So when they're figuring out economic impact of these events, or I guess we're looking at hotel rooms, what other spikes could you
There,
measure?
and again, I'm not real privy to how these multipliers are done. But
Okay.
there are multipliers that, you know, and there's national agencies that do these calculations about out-of-town visitors spend X amount. And so if you have this many out-of-town visitors, and it's a multiplier effect, you know, they're paying $10 for food, and that business that sold, that profited those $10, they went and spent it, and so now this multiplier is up to $15, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I was just also remembering that even though medieval fair is like a pretty big deal, there are other things happening throughout the city that weekend too, so, good to know.
and with the permit stuff, it's just part of the discussions we've had before about looking at our whole permitting system and different fees, whether they're need to be brought up or whether they need to be lowered or whatever, so, or if there was a tiered system, or continuing to do it by booth is the best way or whatever, so. But that just came up and I didn't realize that that's how much, I didn't realize we were doing per booth, I guess, with medieval fair. I thought it was a flat fee
Fee.
of some kind, but.
I think, I agree. Yes, ma'am.
If I could interject here a little bit, the $10 is a deal, so to speak, that they got when we did the special event ordinance, because if anyone comes into town and sets up some, selling wares in somebody's parking lot, I mean, they're paying $150 for one day, and they're bonded. And they have background checks through the state. So with these festivals, we've scaled it all the way back to $10 a vendor. But they're basically collecting it and then returning it to us, because they're charging anywhere from $50 to $200 a vendor for those spaces. And it varies based on the event. But the $10 was basically like a good deal.
Isn't it about $10, $30 for an art walk?
That's what the Norman Arts Council sets. But I was gonna say, I do know that some of these events, it's not uncommon to see a booth that's $1,000 or more. So,
Makers, theirs are pretty high, because there are actual artists that are coming in.
Yeah.
Well, anything more on,
The only other outside agency that we were looking for direction on is the depot. they had requested an increase,
It's 38,900.
yeah, from 50,700 to 50,700, so an increase of $38,900. Last meeting, we had discussion about that. There was no real direction, and there was a question about, I shot off my mouth about the nighttime service. But the question was, did you want to approve that increase or increase it from that or what? So,
Personally, I'm in favor of that we need that person down there to be that emissary, but, yes, ma'am.
I'm in favor, and then I guess if we had to amend it, because I think the question to Sherry was, could you give us real-world numbers for what night service would be so that we would have an actual real-world number to put in the budget? And I don't think we have that. So,
now, again, my hope would be that the 38,000 would cover them, having night service. But that's, I'm speaking only for myself.
that could be amended if we get a number that's like, oh, this is actually reflective of what it would take to include that.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm for it still.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I'm also for it. I think we're asking, or we're desiring for them to have a 7-day service, basically, and a service that we're hoping is going to increase in use and may with the RTA and all that stuff, but even just with the Heartland Flyer. So, yeah, I think it makes sense that we make sure they're able to do it to the adequate level we'd like them to.
Yeah. All right, that's a go, please.
Okay,
May be amended next.
that's all we needed on that one.
IT?
As we, management team and the city managers, budget discussions were being held, you'll recall that at the capital budget retreat that was held back in February, there were some very high dollar requests from the IT department for basically things that we know we're going to have to do to keep legal with our internal computer systems. Microsoft and the server companies basically require you to update your equipment every few years. If you don't, they won't support it anymore. And if they don't support it anymore, then, you don't have the patches or the fixes for outside invasions and that sort of thing. We, in our discussions at the management team level, and Mr. Powers is here, but, we're convinced that this is going to be an ongoing concern, probably in the $600,000 or $700,000 per year range, if not the seven-figure range per year. And so the discussion that we had was about changing the guidelines for the capital sales tax allocations that we do each year. As you know, there is a fixed allocation that we do for maintenance of existing facilities and for street maintenance. And so the discussion was about having a fixed set aside or allocation for IT. So what I'm going to pass around here is just a quick proposal that we had done that might address doing that sort of thing. It is basically reducing the amount that goes to street maintenance each year.
Well, I gotta use the bottom lines on it.
So the first page shows you what those guidelines have been currently. Down at the bottom on the first page is where we actually broke down what we allocated in the budget in this budget year. So you see that there was about 15% that went to street maintenance this year, about 30% to capital outlay and so forth. And then on the second page is what is proposed to be the guidelines going into next budget year. So the guideline would reduce the street maintenance allocation from 25% to 20% and have a new set aside of 5% of the capital sales tax for IT infrastructure. That 5% set aside would equate to about $875,000. And we would hope that on an ongoing basis, we might have to smooth out some things in any individual year. But that would hopefully address those long-term IT infrastructure needs that we know we're going to have. So I'll ask Mr. Powers if there's anything he wants to add to that.
Yes. Sorry, I'll jump up here with you all so you'll get to see my face. I know I don't talk with you all very much, but this is definitely something that's extremely important for the city to consider. And we've talked internally a lot about this, about highways, bridges, and sidewalks, and that's typically what we start focusing on when we're talking about capital projects. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, we have a digital highway system now. And every service that we provide for the city runs along that digital highway. And that thing has done nothing but grow since I started about 10 years ago. And it will continue to do so. We have some direction from the city manager and internally ourselves trying to identify, what's the biggest growth and where we can kind of try to cut some of the data that we store. But just so that you all are aware of what we're talking about, our current posture technically is we have two large disk storage systems. And the reason for that is if we have a physical disaster that took out, let's say a tornado hit this complex, we might lose one of those two pieces. But with the other piece up and running, we can continue at the same level of service. We're not going to paper and utility billing. Dispatch isn't going to radio calls. We continue on with the same software, CAD, and the services that we have. That's expensive, and it's expensive to run it that way. And we've even tried to model that out of, what if we reduce cost and we get rid of one of those things? Well, I don't recommend that because, especially these days, everyone knows how much penetration we're getting on a daily basis from outside forces trying to attack our infrastructure and our data services. But we really have started kind of visualizing this as a digital highways, bridges, and they're prone to breaking and they're prone to wear just like physical things are too. However, we have this cloud over our heads from these other agencies like Apple or Microsoft, just like Anthony talked about. And their models are changing, and they're not advantageous to any of the businesses that are out there. They're advantageous to those organizations. So, they will push us into cloud services. We're on premises on a lot of our services now where we run our own email servers, and we're responsible for keeping those things, upgraded and patched. They want to take that over and then force you into a maintenance agreement, just like every service you see these days. Just like we see with, say Netflix, for instance. That's hey, you want to watch movies? Pay for it on a monthly basis. This is the exact same thing at a bigger scale for technology. It's Microsoft is saying, yeah, I know you want to buy, your Office and license that for all of your users, but why don't you put it up here in the cloud? We'll charge you a monthly or annual service for that, service fee for that. But the advantage to that is we don't have to worry about, like this year and next year, we need to start worrying about truing up our licenses to move to the next version of Office. And we tend to straggle behind just a bit because of the cost. We're on Office version 2016 right now. We need to be getting up to Office version 2019, 2022. This Microsoft Office 365 keeps you at that level all the time, so you're not having to true up every 5 years or however often. The hardware piece of that is a lot more expensive. I touched on a bit of that hardware. That's the backup and replication that we do for disaster recovery. But also in this hardware are all of our application servers. So everything that we use to run anything from computer-aided dispatch and PD and fire, all the way to all of our utility billing systems, planning, community development, all of the different types of software that we use have virtual servers in this environment that we have to support and upgrade. And those bits of software that we use to create the virtual servers are starting to they're not compatible with the hardware that we have. And this is another industry trend. They'll make it uncompatible so that you have to go up to the next versions. And that does nothing but benefit those organizations. Like I said before, unfortunately, we're married to this infrastructure. And there's a lot that we do on a daily basis to try to reduce the footprint where we can. And, you know, it's difficult because, as you all know, just on a lot of the things that you all have to make decisions on, YFAC, the Development Center, the Senior Center, those things have done nothing but increase the amount of equipment that we're responsible for and the amount of data that's being generated because of sales transactions or whatever. Every one of these new buildings that we bring up, the demand is to put access control so people can badge in and out securely, and camera systems all over them. That's all extra data, extra licensing that we're bringing in when we do this. So that's a large number that Anthony and Jacob have gone out and helped identify. I don't know that we would use that number every year, but it certainly is something that we're going to need here in the next 3 or 4 years. The hardware ask that we have that's coming up in this year and in the following year is about 2.7 million. That's for the application servers. That's for the backup and replication infrastructure. It's also for our storage. So we store all of this data. We store all of the email. We have public record searches that come in that we're responsible for making sure that data is available. We also have, you know, every file system, reporting system that the city uses for all sorts of various things. Police, they are a very big consumer of the space because they're having to save things for, you know, body cams, various different types of cases that they're working that may have historical value. And we've got to hang on to those things and kind of identify what we can and can't get rid of. That storage piece is extremely important to that. And then the final piece of it is our file systems. And that's just, I may have already gone over that, but it sounds similar to applications, but the file systems are basically a product of all of the applications that we run. So you get a lot of data out for water usage, any type of reports we use, all the legislation that we store and we keep on our systems. So it's large, and I know you all have a lot of things to consider cost-wise, but this is operational cost, and it's not avoidable, unfortunately.
So council, the process we go through annually in budget development is very collaborative with all the departments. And when it comes to the question of, hey, here's a need, and each department identifies needs, when IT identifies needs, it's a rarity, but everybody in the organization is so completely now dependent on this environment. Tim's requests usually score really, really well because we all recognize what the alternative is, and it's not doable. This particular round of conversations, when we looked at the dollar value of the capital needs with built-in obsolescence from software and platform owners and operators, the goal was to come up with a funding mechanism to make this pill manageably swallowable. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. We can spread the cost of this particular elephant out over a handful of fiscal years as we begin to migrate to that cloud environment that Tim describes. And what we were trying to do was just not totally consume the whole capital budget, to provide council with a little flexibility to say, we really need a sidewalk over here, because those are important too. So this ability to kind of identify a segment of that capital budget to help us meet these needs will allow us to go out and finance the big capital needs and still provide you with a little cash in the bank to solve some of the capital needs that you recognize from your constituents.
Do you anticipate any kind of degradation of services by moving that 5%? Probably stay the same.
We may get to do a couple of fewer sidewalk projects a year, you know, in that scenario. We've been pretty darn successful in, you know, looking for outside funding to help solve those needs that without, you know, grant funding or something coming through ACOG, always wind up back in our capital budget. But when it comes to staff's recognition of the priority of this infrastructure, it's as high as the wastewater treatment plant or the water plant. It's that mission critical to our ability to provide services.
And I would, you know, the little note down there at the bottom of the first page, where we're talking about, we have shifted some of our street maintenance allocations from the capital sales tax to the 5-year revolving GO bond program that we have. So we're really, at least in this fiscal year, not reducing the amount that we would have given to street maintenance.
Thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
This is like far from the future, but I was thinking since we just announced that 820, like, don't we get some efficiency and some savings there and what do we, well, I imagine we'd equip IT department building with some of that to offset, but like, are there ways to find,
I thought that was private.
So that's an interesting thought of other parts in Tim's operating budget. Can we find operating efficiencies that we could shift over to these capital tasks? And I think that it is so reasonable because IT supports the general fund, our enterprise funds, and our internal service funds, that when we find operational savings, and could that be, let's come up with a mechanism to reduce Tim's electric bill, that we could spread those savings around and offset. What it would probably allow us to do is meet some of our upgrade requirements sooner. So it may not look like savings, we just may get compliant with software and licensing and hardware needs faster.
Yes, sir.
That was gonna be my question about the maintenance bond and how that factored in. But like I said before, I think it's a priority public safety matter now, with city governments being cyber attacked daily, and we all get the phishing emails, it seems like daily. You click on the wrong thing and the whole system might be in jeopardy. And, you know, so it's just kind of the way I have to look at it now is it's got to be right on the same plane as our other public safety priority issues, especially the more reliant we've become on every city department has to have the IT department working right, you know, and be up to date. Does the licensing thing have anything to do with the email I get every day that says your Microsoft Outlook box is almost full? And
Yeah.
I don't know how to delete that.
We do try to, we put limits on those, to try to do a storage saving. But, and we can easily increase those. So if you're having that issue, I'll make sure that.
I don't know how to clear
It's
it
not
out
a
or
problem.
anything. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's not a problem.
We've made note of that, we'll take care of that now.
We would not expect you to delete or anything. But I'll address that issue.
Yeah, okay. So I wasn't sure yet if that was something to do with the 2016 Outlook or Office or whatnot, or, but yeah, I'm for this, and especially since we have the maintenance bond that we can, that helps fill in. And I think it's, yeah, I would assume IT is probably one of the bigger consumers of electricity in the city, so, and that's probably only gonna grow more.
Yeah.
And,
Well, each of these buildings we open,
Yeah.
there's at least a data closet in it that we have our equipment in that's serving the whole building. So that's absolutely true. The mayor spoke about degradation of services, and I forgot to mention that we're moving on this as quickly as we can. We used to retain a year's worth of data. So what that means is if you had a file that you saved and you deleted it, we would keep that file for about a year. If you went, I need that file back, that's some important information, can you go retrieve it? We'd be able to go back and retrieve that. That's degraded to about 6 months now because the amount of data that we're backing up and storing. So the faster we move on this, and I think the better off for services. And we don't want to see, when we started seeing that, this has been a couple of years in the running, we've been trying to come up with a way to do this. But definitely appreciate that, especially recognizing that it's an operating cost, and it's not giving us new toys or anything. It's really just kind of keeping services running the way they are today, and maybe expanding because of the amount of expansion we've had physically over the past 2 or 3 years.
Well, does anybody object to moving the 5% or now allocating the 5%?
Hopefully that prevents big surprises in future budget years.
Amen. Savings account. That'll be fast going. Flock cameras.
Yeah, I'll ask Mr. Barber to come up. This is actually a request that the mayor brought forward. There was a request in the capital outlay budget for some additional flock cameras, so just whatever discussion the committee wanted to have.
I'm happy to answer any questions. I think you all were here, or at least most of you were, for the presentation we previously had regarding those devices. Since that time, we don't have them. Metro cities are still continuing to build them out. In fact, when you look at the map of the hundreds of them around the metro, all the way from Purcell to Edmond, or outside Guthrie, I guess, and everything east and west, everybody has them except Norman. Now HOAs can still purchase them, things of that nature. And we are seeing results, positive results of them, even though we don't have them, because when we send information out to our partner agencies saying, hey, can we have help if you all have any information on this vehicle or on this situation? We've had 2 of those in the last couple of weeks that were very helpful. One being a multi-state crime ring involving some burglaries and thefts, reaching into Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. They were able to connect ours to that case through that request, and eventually locate the suspect in Oklahoma and stop that activity. And the other one, much more concerning and honestly more important, was a lady who had gone missing, who had effectively abandoned her children, who were concerned significantly for her safety. We're able to put that BOLO out to our partnering agencies, and in a few moments they were able to come back. 2 different agencies were in the metro and indicate, hey, we don't know who's driving the car, obviously, because that system doesn't look into the vehicles, but that vehicle that you're looking at has been in this area around this apartment complex for the last couple of days. You should go look here. So we were able to send up our team up there and go find her and ensure she was safe. Not only ensuring her safety and that she was there willingly and not being trafficked, as we saw last summer with one of our residents, but also making sure that we're not spending a tremendous amount of limited resources and time trying to track down a person that we're finding. So I'm happy to answer any questions you all have. The request, I believe, was for $40,000. 30 of that is the actual devices. 10 of it is kind of an onboarding process that goes into, and I think that is what we're standing at right now.
Okay. Councilmember Holman?
Thanks for the update on that. I'd kind of thought it was in the budget last year, and then last city manager said it was pulled out, and I remember it being the $30,000 to $40,000. Can you remind us about the how it works if it's set up around the city?
Yep.
Who's able to view it at any given time?
Absolutely.
We're just talking about IT stuff, so how vulnerable is it? And then how long is the data stored on it, or wherever, whatever it is, and those kind of questions that we had before.
Absolutely. So from a data standpoint, it's maintained by Flock, so it does not pile into our overwhelming number of items that we now have to keep, as you all know, and Mr. Bowers is right. Almost every investigation, especially of significance, involves digital media, like tremendous amounts of it. So I have no doubt that we are extremely heavy on there to load. This is maintained by them through a secured server, so we do not have that input. They're all LTE controlled devices. They're run by solar power, so the infrastructure implications are very minimal. The request that we'd submitted was for 10 of them. They'd effectively be put on major roads or primary intersections where you have vehicular traffic. What the system does is it looks at tags in vehicles. So it tracks and monitors all of those vehicles that come through. It pulls the tag numbers out and runs it against national databases that are maintained by the federal government primarily. A local agency can submit into their system and say, we have this missing person thing. But usually those are done through NCIC, which looks for things that are stolen vehicles or vehicles involved in violent crimes. It also pings back to missing persons and exploited children's type databases. And so what happens when it sees a vehicle that matches those descriptions, it notifies that agency and says, hey, can't tell you who's driving it, can't tell you where it's going, but because I don't know, because it's a static image, but here just a moment ago that vehicle was in this area. So what agencies generally see on that is obviously an uptake on their ability to locate those vehicles and potentially help people who are in danger. Along with that, of course, comes property crime reduction, significant amounts of it. I was in a meeting this morning. I always get concerned when these numbers come out because I don't know what the raw numbers are. Percentages are easy to play with, as we know. But they have installed them in the last year. This is a Tulsa metro area agency, and they've seen a 900% recovery rate increase on their stolen vehicles. It also helps us with items like pursuits. If we can't get to them, then we're able to pick them off. So what happens is the system looks at that license plate. The reverse of that from an investigative tool is we're able to go in and query that data that is stored. It's stored for 30 days on their system, and then it's deleted. And what it does is we can say, hey, we had so our last officer involved shooting where the officer was shot at the apartment complex, middle of the evening, not a lot of traffic. We can go pull that, being on Robinson around 2 major intersections. We'd be able to pull that and say, hey, which one of these vehicles is in there? See which one's close, and at least have an idea. So there is investigative properties to that. HOAs also use them. This is not our goal. We're not putting them in neighborhoods in particular. These are major intersections. Is where we would look at. HOAs commonly use them to look in their neighborhood. So when they have a burglary, and they can choose to share the data or not. Some do, some don't. To my knowledge, I don't think we have any in Norman that are right now, unless you're aware of some that have jumped on. And so what happens is they can look at it and say, hey, we had a burglary last night in your neighborhood, or a peeping Tom or something of that nature, and the system will come through and say, hey, all of these vehicles came in, but this one right here has never been in the neighborhood before, or at least in the last 30 days. And so it gives us an indication of what to go look for. So it's a significant investigative tool in that aspect. On our side, that's all controlled by policy. Access is controlled by people who have to go through specific training for it. There's audit logs in it to see who's looking for who. The system in no way looks at people. It cannot tell me the age, gender, race of anything in the car. It's simply a picture of the rear of the vehicle. It can tell us, we can say, hey, we can find a red vehicle, and it will find you a red sedan if you were that able to be specific. Of course, usually we're not.
So this isn't a thing where an officer is sitting down at a computer and having to watch like hours of something?
No, absolutely not.
Is it pictures or is it real-time recorded video of?
When we get them back, the ones I have seen, because we don't have the system, the ones I have seen from other changes, it's a screenshot, and it just says, hey, there's a picture of that vehicle. Is this the one you're looking at? Confirm that the system tells you that's the tag, that yes, that's the tag. Or was it the wrong state or something
Okay.
weird?
And do you, I guess, are there examples of it being like false identifying or anything like that that are notable? I'm sure there's some, but
I'm sure there are. What our policy requires, so we have a policy in place, we don't have the devices, but we do have that. What we require is if you get those notifications, they have to be verified. We're not gonna go make a stop on a third-party vendor. So it's the same thing as if somebody called in and said, hey, my stolen vehicle is going down the street. Before we stop that vehicle and try to see who's in it, especially if it's a particularly dangerous situation, we're going to re-verify independently with with NCIC usually, to verify that that's the right vehicle.
is this system used to, if someone runs a red light, is it used to send them a ticket through the mail?
No enforcement abilities at all.
It's not reading every license plate and catching people that aren't insured and sending them a thing. It's
Those systems do exist.
We don't
The
have
state
those.
runs them. We do not have any, and this does not have that ability at all. We would be using it for criminal investigations, which right now especially, that's things that are hurting our community for sure, or active cases where somebody's imminently in danger. So the time we'd be looking at it.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Grant?
I remember the last time we talked about this, I had mentioned, maybe it was Major Shattuck presenting.
I think so.
New Hampshire state law was a good model, which just requires law enforcement to delete non-hit license plate capture data within 3 minutes. This is people going to the grocery store or the doctor's office, not people who would be on one of these hot lists. And then, I would say for the database part, knowing how that data is shared, like, am I to understand correctly, you guys came up with like a policy for the use of the flock camera?
We have a policy for automated license plate readers in general. They happen to be the most prominent and successful vendor. But we do have a standing policy based on national guidance.
Was that with this agenda?
I honestly don't know. I don't think it was in your packet. That's a standing, that's not a new policy, that's a standing policy we've had for
Could we
quite
get a
some time.
copy of it to
Yeah, of
check
course.
out?
Absolutely.
Mostly my concerns were people who have done nothing, being concerned about a surveillance state. And then also the storage of that also costs money, and 30 days isn't something that I'd want to pay for. It seems like these things get resolved pretty quick if everybody in the system is communicating. So yeah, mostly my concerns are around not having this system misused to keep track of people. So anyways, it'd be great to see what the license plate reading policy is now. I guess some of the other parts of this was, database use. One thing I'm reading is, as much as we might hope that all police watch lists were 100% reliable, we know they are not. In fact, the largest and most commonly used national watch list, the National Crime Information Center database, does not even comply with the 1974 United States Privacy Act, basic accuracy, reliability, and completeness requirements. That means allowing your ALPR data to be run against such databases will subject anyone living or visiting your town to unjustified arrest, detention, which is especially dangerous proposition for members of vulnerable, already over-policed communities. So I don't want to contribute to that, and I would like to make sure that if we have policy that, like, we're doing checking all our boxes on that.
Major, the Amber Alert that went off on everybody's phone last night, I'm assuming those things would be connected. So if that vehicle drove by one of these cameras, they'd be able to locate.
It'd be on a hot list.
Correct. They would come in through, those come into NCIC through Department of Public Safety. In fact, that's one of the things we were using last summer when we had the child and the mom abducted and put into the human trafficking scenario. That's one of those times that would come in. That one went south, but those were tools that we were trying to access and use for sure.
And I would point out, in a scenario like that, not only is it on the hot list, but everybody else who was driving past that, we don't need to pay to have that data for 30 days. So that's kind of where I stand on it.
So the timeline's a good question. I don't know specifically about, you said New Hampshire, I don't know specifically about their state law.
I can send it to you. I'll make
No,
it
that's
a-
fair. I'm not questioning you. I'm not familiar with it. My bet is that when you're looking at a system, and again, I'm kind of speculating, but knowing how these function and from an investigative standpoint, those are systems that are used for enforcement action, like an insurance reader or a red light signal. On these, obviously, crimes aren't reported within 2 or 3 minutes. So I don't know if their system is scalable. I know at a national level, they say no more than 30 days. Now, that may be tailorable, it may say 15.
Some have
It may
do
say
72
something.
hours.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. And I know that even on our 2 most recent larger missing person cases, we weren't even notified for almost 48 or 72 hours.
Yeah. Well, want to find the people for sure.
I understand.
Some of it comes back to, this is kind of unregulated. This is a company that is nationwide. What are we doing as a public body to make sure it's not abused?
Of course.
All right, further, yes, sir.
So I wasn't aware that we actually committed to getting the flock system.
We are not right now. We have
Okay.
requested it in the past and this year, but we do not have any and don't have any in process right now.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to be opposed to putting the flock system up, period. The system, we can't guarantee any kind of safety or protection on any of the data. I would ask Mr. Powers how good he feels about the security of the databases that Flock uses to store this revolving data, but I can guarantee you if Yahoo, if Facebook, if all the biggest companies in the world can have their data breached, so can Flock. Now, on the cost, don't we already have cameras at every intersection?
None of them record. There's a traffic system that
They don't
built in related to those, but we don't record anything.
Oklahoma state law, I think, is why
Okay.
we can't store that.
So, even more reason not to start installing cameras on every, where is this gonna be installed on every intersection?
No, there's 10 citywide.
Just 10 citywide? Which ones?
I don't have that current list. I probably should. But they're major intersections. We're talking like Flood and Robinson, Flood and Tecumseh. Probably something closer to I-35 where we're seeing traffic come in and out of the community.
Okay, so 10 major intersections. We're looking at 200,000, at least 200,000 vehicles per day being recorded and monitored.
I have no idea what those traffic loads are, but several, I'm sure.
Just estimating low there.
It is.
I think taking this step into this mass surveillance without the people's even consent on it, I think we can find the bad guys the old-fashioned way just fine. Yeah, we could expedite some cases, but so would microchipping every human in town. But we shouldn't be doing that either. So, I don't know, as benevolent of a policy as we can craft, we still can't guarantee that the data is going to be safe. The information is going to be safe. The people aren't, they're using AI to go through and comb through all the video. How do we know that they're not using that to scrape data as it's streamed through? What are they doing with that data? Who are they partnered with? Who's funding this company? How are they monetizing that data? Do we have a guarantee that they're not?
They do guarantee they will not sell their data. That is one thing they do cover.
Okay.
They will not partner, sell it, distribute it. And the data they're collecting, not arguing with you by any means, I understand your concerns for sure. The data they're collecting is honestly captured by businesses and local surveillance companies all over the city, like every day. So while we as a city are not collecting it, it is out there. The challenge for us, of course, is that we have to go find it and know where to look. Obviously, we can't scour every convenience store in town, much less the man hours that would person to take to dig through that and find it. But these are they're only vehicles only in public areas. We're not aiming at neighborhoods by any means. That is not our intent.
Okay. I just don't feel comfortable with it at all. But so if we haven't approved it yet, then how is it making it to the budget?
Well, the question is,
Just-
yeah, do you want it included in
Okay.
the draft proposed budget or
Right.
not?
So I am opposed to it.
No, I feel like also the other council members should weigh in on this as well.
So what we would do is prepare a budget amendment to be discussed on the floor at budget adoption time under that set of circumstances.
Could we have a discussion with the full council about it before that?
We can schedule that for study session or pre-council conference next Tuesday? Or study session the following Tuesday?
No. Well, you're pretty heavy next Tuesday. You have executive session and another topic. The following Tuesday is the executive session on the central library. But we'll get it worked in somewhere in the next couple weeks. When is the,
Yeah, and again, it just wouldn't be in the city manager's proposed budget.
that's fine, you can do this.
You have the April 6th, I believe, study session to talk about the general fund, and then another one to talk about the capital fund, but those would be amendments to the city manager.
Because we just gotta print a book, and it just wouldn't be in the printed book, but before the final book's printed, then we would have clear direction from the whole council.
And it's not a heck of a lot of money, 40,000.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Do you anticipate additional budget amendments, requests from the police department like we had last year? Or, could we get maybe some feedback from these other cities around here that are using it, if they've had any negative experience with it so far, or anything they would caution us about before we get it, if we do get it?
So we could do some inquiry, and maybe provide summary information back to our council, and ask some questions of the elected officials in Oklahoma City, City of Moore, where these are currently, in full operation, and get you some feedback. They've been out there for over a year in Moore and Oklahoma City, and they continue to expand.
And then just nationally too, if there have been any notable incidents where there's been breaches or something like that that's been of note.
I did notice this morning that the city of San Francisco announced they're going to install 400 flock cameras as part of their upcoming budget process. So I thought, holy smokes, that's a full-scale, all-in kind of a move.
But not everybody's like signing up for the 30 days of data or keeping data on people that aren't on the hit list for whatever. If it's a non-custodial parent taking a child or a crime that's been committed. So, yeah, I guess too, when we do that study session, besides having like the policy of what we already do, like I would like to discuss more about the policy we might adopt if this is actually a thing.
Can do.
So we'll skip that one.
The next on the list is a request that Councilmember Nash came forward with related to the Animal Welfare Division, and so I'll just turn it over to him.
Okay. Yeah, no, got a couple of the people from the Animal Welfare Division and committee here, Mark Howery and Becca Bean. But there are a couple things that I think Animal Welfare made a request on that for one reason or another didn't make it all the way to the formal request. That, you know, they're items that don't really seem like they're that big of a deal just on the surface, but then if you kind of think about it, I think it's very important that we do consider adding these things to the budget. In total, it's about $180,000. Now, $120,000 of that's going towards kennels. So we kind of looming on in the near future is kennel replacement. And there's kennels have a lifespan of about 8 years, and you know, either we can replace them all in one go. It's about $1 million to replace the whole thing, or do a revolving replacement policy that replaces a you know, one set a year, you know, over an 8-year cycle at $120,000. Now this is probably one of the items that we could use a kind of more in-depth insight on and here after the next couple of requests. I'll ask questions of the two in our audience to elaborate a little bit on the kennels, because kennels is one of those things I don't understand a whole lot on, except that they don't last forever. They need to be replaced in time, and if we can replace them in sections each year rather than just at one lump sum, then it might be kind of advantageous to our budget and consistency on a year-to-year basis. The next part of that is about $50,000 for a vet tech position. And now the vet tech position would specifically assist with vaccinations and spays and neuterings and the spay and neutering programs. And, you know, I think the spay and neutering program, you know, they're limited by how many hands they've got right now to get in there and actually do the sniffing. But, you know, if you think about the workload that's put onto animal welfare, the majority of it is essentially because of an overpopulation in pets in the city. And being able to increase their capacity on how many spays and neuters they can do, how many vaccinations they can get out there, and all their low-income, no-income spay and neuter programs, that stretches out every other dollar that we put into that program, because then that reduces the pressure going forward into the future, which otherwise, if they can't spay and neuter as many as they can, then either we're going to be paying for it by increasing the size of the animal welfare and their facilities, or staff, or both. And in the meantime, it's going to be putting a much heavier workload on an already overloaded set of staff that we have there. I think I was talking to Dr. Amy Cox Tyler yesterday, who told me that I think so far this year, at least 400 spays and neuters. That's 400 animals that would have probably otherwise been breeding here in the next few years had they not been able to get this done now. And the only thing that's limiting right now is the hands and the feet on the ground to do it. And so just that one vet tech position, like I said, I think we'll stretch every other dollar that we have into animal welfare and be able to keep the facilities that we have adequate for a much longer period of time. And then the last little piece of that's $10,000 for just veterinary supplies and food. But back to the kennel, if Mark or Beck, if one of you could kind of expand on I don't know if I missed anything on.
You're more eloquent than I am, but I'll start and then you can fix what I forget. So the police department's doing a phenomenal job down there with the Operation the Animal Shelter. And the city a number of years ago set a goal of no kill of adoptable animals. And they've been able to maintain that since almost every month since 2015 when the current shelter was opened. So they are doing a phenomenal job on what we call the back end of the animal system. So you've got a front end, which is the animals coming in, the back end, which is the animals that are there. They're doing a great job with the back end of it. The front end is what we're trying to control with the vet tech position, hopefully limiting the number of unwanted animals through spay and neuter animals within the community. And as Michael pointed out, the city has been investing money into a low-cost spay and neuter program now for almost a decade. And one of the neat things that the police department has implemented here in the last year is trying to do some of those spay neuters at the facility with the existing veterinarian. They were not able to do that prior to this year. And in doing them there at the shelter, they're able to spread that money out a lot farther because they can do it much more at a much lower cost than a veterinarian in town can do. And quite honestly, from what I hear from the veterinarians, a lot of them are not vying for the low-income customers that are out there. So, these are animals that are kind of falling through the cracks because they're not highly sought after as clients. And anyone that has a dog or cat knows the cost of spay neuter just goes up more and more. It's not like it was in the 1980s. It's a lot more expensive now. I'm not sure what else.
What is the
Another
cost?
thing too is they did talk about using this new vet tech position also not only to help with spay neuter surgeries, but to coordinate their foster program. Right now they have one of the one of the kennel attendants, that's not the right term, kennel techs, that is coordinating their foster program. And they move that to the vet tech position. So they can have a more concerted effort in the foster program. They have a foster program for taking female dogs and cats that are at the shelter, getting them out of the building to a foster home until they can be brought back in to be spayed. So it reduces the disease risk to those animals that don't have a well-developed immune system.
What is the cost to have an animal spayed or neutered? Just for that, just
It's-
off the wag?
If you're talking about a large dog, it's expensive. Go to a veterinarian, you're talking close to $200.
Oh, you're
Now,
lucky to get it for 200.
You're lucky if you get
I just
$200.
paid 700.
I haven't done it in a long time.
For my
700.
110-pound dog at our private vet.
Oh, wow.
Because he was he's very large.
Wow.
Yeah.
Neutering a cat is pretty inexpensive. But spaying a large dog is expensive. Spaying a cat is expensive.
Well,
say
that-
3 to
It's
500
not
is
even for the
pretty
first day.
standard. You're lucky you can get it for 2 or 3 anymore.
The eighties, you could get it done for $75, you know, it wasn't that expensive.
Dollars.
It's not like that anymore.
Well, my concern in that is that an employee working for the city of Norman has a 30% benefit load, is that right?
Roughly
Appro-
35.
Approximately. So if we take $50,000, you're gonna add on 30% more to have.
Goal salary is about 35 to 40,000.
Okay, so you're already adding that in.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's all?
Yes.
Yeah, labor of love in some of these,
Well, and divide that by 500. And so, would that,
The budget estimate for an RVT right now is 80,000 a year. The 50,000 is about salary.
okay, yes, ma'am.
I was curious, maybe y'all can answer, what is we're supposed to be a no-kill shelter, but I know that's like the goal, but not always what happens. I'm a little curious about like this vet tech, obviously spaying and neutering animals will help not have overflow and have to make that hard choice which animals go. I know they do the flights, but those are only available certain times of year when the weather's good enough. Yeah, so like what's the outlook right now? Like, are we seeing more?
Great question.
euthanasia?
All shelters and rescues in Oklahoma and throughout the South and Midwest are full to capacity 100% of the time, including Norman. And what shelters and communities across the nation who have successfully conquered their animal overpopulation have done is spaying and neutering. It's the only thing that we can do to get ahead of the numbers. And what we're seeing now is a lot of the northern and western shelters that have taken a lot of the populations from the south, they're getting full. So the flights do happen, 4 to 6 times a year. Maybe we'll get 50 animals out of our shelter, but it will never be enough. The transports can't take all of the animals from the south anymore. So really, the only thing we can do to keep our costs down, keep our facility manageable, is to stem this tide of the front end, of how many animals are coming into the shelter. And we can do that through, some strengthening of ordinances. We're looking at that as a committee, but mainly through just spaying and neutering every single animal we can get our hands on.
And then my next question relates to the unhoused community because I do think we have outreach.
That's right.
They're trying to get that done with
That's
spay and
exactly
neuter.
right. So there's kind of an open door policy for our unhoused community to bring their animals into the shelter, and if they need transportation, Caravans has been providing that bridge. It is not always easy to convince people to, take their animal, which is their best friend, their protection, away from them for a day. So it takes a lot of time to kind of form that relationship, that trust, and sometimes that comes through, it's really Dr. Tyler and her program that does tons of outreach, giving away, supplies, giving food away, and building those relationships and saying, this really is the best for you, the health of your pet. But she said that, lots of times when she's doing the free vaccine clinics through her nonprofit, which she runs, separate from city, she's just seeing tons and tons of puppies still. So there's definitely a great need, and I believe they did 100 spays and neuters in just January and February, apart from the 300 that were done for shelter pets, so in the community. We are seeing a difference being made in our intake numbers, and our intake last year was actually lower than the year before, which is unheard of in these times. Not by a lot, but a little bit. So we're making a dent, and I think we just need to keep going in that direction. It's the only thing that we can do to
And
ourselves
would
out of
an
this crisis.
additional vet tech also be going out into these communities
Yeah, I
to?
asked Dr. Tyler, did she envision that she would be working, she works 4 10-hour shifts, and would she be, having both of her techs there? Because typically, in a typical veterinary setting, you would have one veterinarian with at least 2 techs, maybe 3, depending on how many surgeries they're trying to do. And she said, well, it would allow us some overlap to where my current technician can have a lunch break. She works through her lunch.
Okay.
We're talking about, really a safety and human health issue in all this too, because the stress levels are very, very high every single day at the shelter. And retaining the staff we have by supporting them is also a really important consideration. Thank you.
Further comments from council?
On the no youth policy, so all the animals that have been euthanized in the city of Norman over the last 9.5 years have been just ones that were untreatably sick or had behavioral issues that made them unadoptable. So there hasn't been any. Yeah, none of them have been euthanized for space for almost a decade.
That's commendable.
Yeah.
Thoughts on, does this go, no go?
And I would point out that this was not a request from the police department. There was 110 personnel requests in the budget, but this was not one of them.
And we won't be recommending funding 110. Depending on the final revenue projections, you may fund 2.
Will this be included in that too?
It's not currently, but this,
we do it?
this is council's direction, so whatever council says goes in that budget, goes in that budget.
I guess part of my question is, what are we weighing a tech against?
Boy, the requests were, every department had requests for additional personnel.
30 firefighters, of course, the SROs you're familiar with. There's, every department in the city.
Communications, but every department had requests for additional bodies, just.
Well, my thought is that there's some common sense in the idea that if we don't stem 6 puppies at a time or 4 puppies at a time, whatever that mom's gonna bring, we'll be up to our earlobes in dogs and cats. We seem to already be. And so it's a greater good question, I guess.
That's closer to 400, not just 6, in the last just 2 months.
400 times 6, 24
It was spays and neuters in,
all those
I
things
think,
we-
January and February.
It could cost us more not to.
I'm thinking that's right.
I support it. I mean, anything to prevent things from happening, whether it's IT or unwanted puppies and kittens everywhere.
I'm supportive of it. I also sat through a meeting where somebody was operating what they said was a kennel, but it did not have enough people. And I definitely value having staff that's supported and not overrun, and I do know they do a lot with a little over there. I'm also interested in the phasing of kennel replacement. I think that, like all things, we should think about what we gotta replace and build it into a budget timeline. So, yeah, that's where I stand on it.
Ammonia is hard on any metal,
Yeah.
so.
There were some requests from the police department for replacing the K-9 unit kennels, but not this request was not forwarded.
And I think they did cover the vet supplies and food
Yes.
requested.
That's in this, that we're, no, that's a
That was
different.
requested in the budget.
That was requested in the budget, okay.
I'm good with it.
It seems to be consensus that we carry that on into the proposed
will be
budget,
included.
please. And life would be good.
Okay.
Any further questions on any of these items? All right, item number 2, discussion regarding monthly revenue and expenditure reports. More fun.
More fun. The only thing that I draw your attention to this year, and then respond to any questions that you have, is on page 2 of your revenue and expenditure report, you see the room tax. And yes, the increased room tax revenue rate was projected for. Our projections were a bit too high. You see that we are about 54% above collections at this time last year. We're about 15% below our projections for this current fiscal year. So just keep that in mind going forward. We'll do a better job of projecting next year because we'll have some history at the new tax rate. But just wanted to draw your attention to that. Other than that, I just respond to any questions that you may have.
Oh, just noting we got 4 out of the last 3 out of the last 4 months have a positive bar graph, or compared to last year. But we're 1, 2, 3, 4. Since July, you've had 4 positive and 4 negative, and one that's 0.07. So, and then I noticed too that for this month in the city comparison, we were the only one that's not in the negative each year, which was nice. But also weird because it's like we're at 0.82% above March of 2023. Like OKC is 4.2 negative, Moore is 6.3 negative, you know, and then Lawton has had for the last several months, the last 2 months, they were 13.1, 15.7, 7.4, and then all of a sudden they're negative 0.39. So it's just always interesting to see every month how and why.
It is.
And
It's just hard figuring where you put the pin in there.
Yeah. And comparing to historic highs. So we're still, in the other one, still maintaining levels way above pre-2020 levels, but we've had a slight decline from the last year and the year before that, so it looks like it's negative, but we're actually way above what the average trend was up until 2020. So interesting how it's maintaining at that higher level too, I think. So I don't know if there's anything new that you've seen since the last month on interest rates or anything like that that's going on.
The Fed did, come out with a statement today that they're keeping rates where they have been with a downward bias, but the market responded favorably to that. And it's been a very positive bond and stock market for the last 8-10 months.
Are there any sales tax trends you've noticed, or like retail-based stuff, or big foreclosures or expansions or anything like that?
No, again, and that's where, a city like Norman, one store closing does not make a trend for us, or one store opening for that matter. It's a much bigger Titanic to turn than that. So, yes, we do monitor things. We kind of listen to what folks are saying anecdotally about how things are going. But again, everything that we hear is just basically flat or I don't know.
Well, I saw that article today about Norman being a good spot for investment, but I don't know exactly what investment that means. But and then I think since our last finance committee meeting, we had the governor sign the grocery tax repeal for the state level, and we've had already people asking about it in Norman, or when are the cities going to repeal theirs? And
Yeah,
I've had
and we
a
did have
canned response
requests.
to that, but
Yeah, and I have my canned response, which is that, the state bill does not in and of itself target any impact on cities. Now, I have had requests from individual council members and individuals from the public about what if it were to apply to the city. We have done some calculations. We know that it would be in the loss of millions of dollars per year, not just to the general fund, but to the capital sales tax, the public safety sales tax, the Norman Forward sales tax. We're very dependent on sales tax, but it's very difficult to quantify what that loss would be. And the reason for that is that where we are enabled to track NAIC codes, North American Industry Classification codes, but there's a big old nebulous NAIC code, which is general merchandise, which we call the Walmart category. And Walmart is a grocery store, but it's also an auto store, and it's also a clothing store. And when they go up or down, and if they stop collecting grocery sales tax, what their impact would be is very difficult to quantify vis-a-vis everything else that they're selling. So again, my larger concern is with not the Walmarts or the Targets, but with the smaller stores that will not be able to separate out the city from the other folks that they're collecting tax for. and they will not collect the grocery sales tax for the city, I think we're going to lose some revenue there. How much, I don't know. But again, where you have very sophisticated cash registers at the point of sale at a Target or a Walmart, I think they'll do a good job of enforcing. But I am very concerned about some small retailers that are, they're not gonna be able to split out the state 4.5% from the city's, 3.875.
Would that be something that the,
Shakira might be able to help us
well,
out with.
Shakira, but that the state, can't think of the state's name for IRS, but the state.
Oklahoma Tax Commission.
Yeah, OTC.
And again,
Is
but
that something
again,
they would be?
no, their job is to enforce the state tax.
Oh, okay.
And so
Yeah.
when the Oklahoma Municipal League, these are all concerns that we have had and stated, but the bill is passed now, so.
So now cities will have to find a way to make sure that everybody is collecting the city version?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems pretty,
How many convenience stores are there?
yeah, I mean, how many one-offs are there?
Yeah, that was actually my question. Like, when we say small biz, who do we mean? Do we mean like the local gas station?
The local convenience stores,
Not the
and
Dollar
again, not so
General?
much just think of, where you go that has a computerized cash register. Because again, remember that there are different things being taxed now. If you buy things with food stamps, you don't collect the sales tax now. And they have to make that distinction. But the Earth, for example, and that's just off at the top of my head, of a small retailer that is collecting grocery tax that may or may not have that computerized cash register to separate out the city from the state.
So if I can help, so it would kind of depend on the accounting system, if you will, that they have in place. So if they don't have, a robust accounting system, then they're not going to be able to assign different account codes to different types of transactions in order for them to run reports and segregate out, the state sales tax versus the city sales tax. So I can see where, like, a small business, like my favorite little store where I get some things to make Mexican food. So I could see where they have like just the classic, punch in, the numbers and multiply. So
It's not like a QuickBooks kind of entity.
yeah, it's not a
even.
QuickBooks.
I have a
It's
very favorite store.
ledger
Yeah, they
paper
have
and a notebook
They basically have a
paper.
calculator.
So,
And they go,
yeah, and then on the NICS codes, on multiple tax returns that I've examined, and I get understanding behind the business, and then I see the NICS code on it, I'm like,
That ain't right.
this does not make sense at all.
It's interesting to see how that will play out. I know several mayors, Mayor Stillwater made a pretty public comment about his concern for that, yeah, it's only the state, but it's going to impact cities. And for, like I mentioned before, places like Noble where they have a single grocery store and like 2 convenience stores. And that's the vast majority of their whole sales tax revenue probably comes from those 3 places. And so if they aren't collecting grocery sales tax, how does a place like Noble even survive, from a city budget standpoint? So, yeah, interesting.
All right. Any other discussion for Mr. Francisco? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item number 3, internal audit programs status. Ms. Shakira. Oh,
Hello all. How you doing? Okay, so what we already know is that the IA charter, the resolution for policy for the internal audit policies and procedures, and the internal policy and procedure manual are underway and under review by the finance committee, and we're waiting to establish a audit committee, but the finance committee is acting as audit committee. As of now, right, as far as processes, I am doing a risk management process, and a part of that is evaluating the goal of that is evaluating the adequacy and the effectiveness of internal controls citywide. And 2, objectives we have right now is establishing a P-card program or recommending the establishment of a P-card program. That's underway within the finance department. I've had some conversations with the HR director, and there is a big interest in switching or changing how we do timekeeping and payroll. Our current system, Munis, does not integrate with, IntelliTime does not integrate easily with Munis. It's a manual process to basically export time records and then be manually input into payroll. For one, just internal control nightmare for somebody like me. So from the payroll tech, Danielle, she said that she's able to adjust time in IntelliTime. I almost fell. I almost fainted. I believe it should be, if you are using whatever time system, that time system should integrate whatever payroll system we use. And the only ones that should be able to change it are department heads through approval. And that's not the case. We have staff that is able to make those changes. That's that. And then once the risk management process is completed, we can go on to the full risk assessment process for all 13 departments. I've developed, or in the process, I'm hoping that this is the last number, but I have now developed the audit universe, which is about, and it may grow, may decrease, but it's 226 units. So within the city of Norman, there's an option to look at 226 departments, their divisions, the functions, the programs, the accounts, and the funds. Now, risk assessment will, of course, decrease that greatly on what is actually worth looking at and the things that align with city council's priorities, and which is, impacts on the city related to OU's move to the SEC, which will bring business development, sports events, tourist activities, and then second to that is completion of multiple comprehensive plan updates, including transportation, stormwater, and public safety. And City Council is also focused on addressing the housing shortage and the homelessness problem within Norman. So with that, we are finalizing a investigation into contract K-2223-56 with anticipation of a renegotiation upon management's responses to my recommendations. We are looking into bank records for that contract and finalizing expenditures that was used with city, or spent with city funds. So hopefully by the next payment date, I'd like to offer a limited use report to the 8 council members, the mayor, city manager Darrell, finance director Anthony, and our city attorney Catherine. That limited use report will not be available to the public. It is confidential. It contains information that will impact the city, its citizens, and the population the program serves. There will be a report that is available to the public, but it will not be as detailed as the limited use report. And that limited use report will contain language that basically says it should not be disseminated to the public. It is for your eyes only. And that is my update.
And that's forthcoming when, your report?
I would like to give that to you within the next 9 days, so by the end of March.
And council, since we had the conversation with Mr. Francisco on the potential impact of the state reduction or elimination on grocery sales tax, and really our access to Shakira now, I'm just glad we have this position, this person, to ask Shakira that when we start getting sales tax deposits after the new reduction in state sales tax has taken effect, her ability to contact her counterparts up in Oklahoma City, who are obviously going to have the exact same concerns. And look how many points of sale with potential food sales are in it in all of Oklahoma City. It's got to be massive. But to be able to benefit from each other's recognition where we may have problems, even if we need to wind up offering some cleanup legislation or something to help us kind of get our arms around what that impact is, if it's an unintended impact state action, that we may need to go knock on some doors of some of the sales tax collectors, and ask, I don't know, even know what our audit authority is for a, you know, a business that's supposed to comply with state sales tax or with local sales tax and may not have the ability to. We've never been here before, but we've also never had a professional who can help us get through that
Well, in
process.
terms of sales tax, there's always special projects you can run on sales tax. I ran numerous sales tax projects when I was in New York. But what happens is it's more of a outside effort, of course, because we don't necessarily have their tax records. So it would be, of course, in partnership with OTC. And I would have to basically consult a liaison with them to get those records, to basically have them enforce their sales tax and send us our piece of it. But yeah, it's possible. It's always possible.
Under our contract with the tax commission, we do have the authority to request the individual tax records of an individual
Then there
business.
you go.
Yeah.
For home
We've done
free?
it in some points in the past, but not that often.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a process to it. I requested fencing. I don't believe there's a fee for fencing. You just have to have an MOU. I have to write that up. But fencing is basically the BSA Treasury, from the Treasury Department. Cash deposits, pre-inventory is most likely familiar with it. But when businesses make large cash deposits or suspicious cash deposits, it's reported to the Treasury Department through the Bank Secrecy Act. And those records can be compared to sales tax records. So in New York, what we would do is sales tax was reported quarterly, a month after collection, and we would basically compare bank deposits to sales tax records and also tax returns. A lot of times, we would find that a person could put, this is just an arbitrary number I'm throwing out there, $500,000 in gross sales on their tax returns, and then the bank deposits will show that they deposited $1.5 million. And that is what we would tax them on the $1 million that was not recorded on the tax forms. And we go from there with penalties and interest and get an extra piece from their non-compliance.
Questions from council? Hearing none?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Update.
Of course.